We were walking through the Brothers collection and selected this 1969 Charger Daytona to be the muscle car of the week. This week's Muscle Car of the Week is a 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, and these cars are the stuff of many, many legends and stories. It's kind of interesting. Today, you see one, and the novelty is kind of the big wing and the nose cone, but the story is that stuff is all business. I mean, this is done for a very specific purpose. These were not just gimmicky things that the Dodge division put on this car to sell cars or to have a flashy image. I mean, now this thing has been featured in, Fast and Furious movies, but back then, the whole reason for this was to go faster. The look of the Daytona is all business. It's all done for a reason. Basically, throughout the 60s, everything about NASCAR was getting bigger. The crowds were getting bigger, popularity of the sport got bigger, cars got faster, and even the tracks got longer. They invented the Super Speedway, which is a NASCAR track that's over a mile long. On the shorter tracks, the slick aerodynamic Dodge Charger 500 was doing very well. That car had a 426 Hemi, maxed out for NASCAR performance, so they added a few aerodynamic tricks like a flush rear window and a cleaned up nose. And on the short tracks, that was one of the cars to beat. However, it wasn't enough oomph to make a successful car on the super speedways. And that's where the Daytona project came from. They named it Daytona after one of the super speedways, and they realized they couldn't do any more to the engine legally, so they looked at other ways to clean up the aerodynamics on a Charger to make it competitive. And what they came up with was what you see here. It's a very unique package. It starts at the tip of the nose with a nose cone that added length to the front of the car and smoothed out that leading edge. They hid the headlights. There's an air dam underneath that nose cone that smooths out the bottom of the car. The fenders are unique with little bubbles that provide a couple things: tire clearance and a way to get heat out of the brakes. But of course the biggest thing physically and for performance was the big giant rear wing. There's a lot of tall tales about the height of the Daytona's wing. It's an adjustable wing. It's got fasteners on the end, and you can change the pitch, which is what they did in NASCAR to change the downforce on the back. Chrysler engineers knew that by reaching higher above the car, they would get into what they called clean air. And clean air is air that isn't disturbed by the shape of the car, so they could reach up there to get air that would help push the back of the car down. And the big debate is about the height of the wing. And the engineers knew that, between 20-25 inches over the rear deck lid, they'd be in the right air that they wanted. However, to make the thing functional, it still had to clear the deck lid. So both of those stories are true, that yes, they had to make it high enough to get into the air that they wanted, and it had to be high enough to clear the deck lid when you open the trunk. So that settles all the arguments. You heard it here. This car feels nice and kind of broken in inside. The odometer is showing 50,448 miles. The seats feel like a comfortable pair of shoes, although this one's kind of like sitting in a hole. Got a lot of headroom. But this is a big car, so they had a lot of headroom. The dashboard is something you'd expect from a super speedway cruiser. 150 mile an hour speedometer, fuel gauge, temp gauge, oil pressure, and alternator gauges all lined up ready to keep you informed. It also has an 8,000 RPM tachometer and a clock in the middle of the tach. So it's a nice display. One thing that I noticed is that, whoever put 50,000 miles on this car knew it pretty well, because you cannot see the front of that nose cone. You have no idea how long this car is. And the visibility in the back really isn't that great either. This rear window is, a little restrictive. You're not going to hit anything with the wing, but you got to be careful in parking lots next time you drive a Daytona. And these cars really did get long with that nose cone. I mean, this thing's over 226.5 inches long, so you got to be careful. You could get your Dodge Daytona built a couple different ways. This one has the 440 single 4-barrel 375 horsepower engine under the hood. Most of them came with that package. There were 294 of these built with the 440 and the automatic transmission. They made 70 of them that had the 426 Hemi. Most people think that if it's got a wing, it's a Hemi car. It's not really the case. There was 503 of these things built total, but the vast majority were 440 automatics. That 440 is, interestingly, kind of a lower compression. It's about 10 to 1, which wasn't as radical as some of the other things you could get in 1969, but it made for a nice driving car in the street. 375 horsepower at 4,600 RPM, 480 foot-pounds of torque at 3,200 RPM. It's got a torque flight automatic transmission. It's a sure grip rear differential. The gear ratios range from 323 as the factory stock option up to 410 if you wanted to order something special. Dual exhaust. And the rest of the Daytona package included basically everything the Charger 500 had. So that meant heavier duty front torsion bars, front sway bar, heavy duty brakes, heavy duty springs, rear heavy duty springs and shocks, 14 by 6 inch wheels. This one's got the Magnum wheels on it, and 14-inch tires. This one has red stripe tires on it, so it all looks the way it did when it was brand new. But one note is that these are not Charger 500s that had the nose and wing put on them. These started off as regular Chargers and had the 500 suspension put on them and then converted to Daytona with the nose and the rear wing. They were all about going fast. That 150 mile an hour speedometer could easily be buried by that 440 four-barrel, and the 426 Hemi cars would push them even faster. They said that the street versions with the right road, you could probably hit 160, 170 miles an hour. The big question is, did it work? And the answer is absolutely. This car had a drag coefficient of 0.28. And there's a fine balance, because if that wing was too high, it became an aerodynamic drag. So they found the sweet spot. And that 0.28 drag coefficient, to put that in relative terms, most of the cars that you buy, you know, the late 90s, even the 2000s, even today, don't have that low of a drag coefficient. And without that wing and nose cone and spoilers, this thing was a brick. So it really paid off. In fact, Buddy Baker in 1970 was able to drive one of these things at NASCAR on a super speedway over 200 miles an hour. He set the speed record, the first car to go over 200 miles an hour, and that record held true all the way into the 80s. So it was definitely worth it, and it helped Chrysler and the Dodge boys reclaim a lot of the victories on the super speedways. And Richard Petty famously drove the Plymouth version to victory after victory, so it really paid off. The bummer is that NASCAR changed the rules and outlawed all this stuff, so by 1971 it was all done. But that's why it's super cool whenever you see a Daytona in person. Take some time and look at it, because everything here was done for a reason. But what worked on the speedway didn't necessarily always work on the street. That nose cone blocked off a big part of the radiator, and at low speeds these things were famous for overheating. So for the people that bought one to drive around as an everyday car, their experience wasn't that great at low speeds and idling in traffic. And there's another kind of interesting irony in NASCAR throughout 1969-70. The Ford Torino Talladega won at Daytona, and the Dodge Charger Daytona won at Talladega. These cars are just too cool, and we have more pictures of it on our MuscleCarOfTheWeek.com website. And don't forget to check out our Facebook page. We've got a preview of next week's car there, and of course you can share those with your friends. And our YouTube channel, if you subscribe to that, you'll never miss an episode or a cool car from Muscle Car of the Week.